Hey everyone, my name's Ashwath. I'm one of the co-founders at Currant. We're an influencer marketing agency and a platform. We match nonprofits, advocacy orgs, purpose-driven organizations with content creators to talk about their impact, reach audiences more effectively, and make sure that organizations can share their work with a larger audience. I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about sort of the role that creators can play in helping drive news and impact forward, and also touch a little bit on the conversation that was had earlier about the election and some of my theories on sort of what went wrong and how our media ecosystem really impacted the space. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about sort of my background and why I do what I do at Currant. So I started Currant about 4.5 years ago when I was in college in DC, because I was in a lot of impact spaces, I was in a lot of nonprofit spaces, and we were always trying to figure out how to reach young people, and a lot of times I was the only young person there, and like most definitely the only person that looked like me, and all of these organizations were trying to figure out how to reach Gen Z, and still are, without Gen Z, which didn't make a ton of sense. And so I was like, hey, I'm going to start Currant. I'm going to sort of bring more young people into rooms like this, and I'm going to represent our voices more. Around that time when I started, I went to like a startup event, and I saw this guy speak. He was the first chief HR officer at LinkedIn, and he was speaking about culture and startups, and like he had a lot of stories in corporate America. And I saw him speak, and my first thought was like, I would watch this on TikTok. Like, you have to be on TikTok. Weird first thought, but, and so I cold DM'd him on LinkedIn, which is ironic because he was at LinkedIn. I cold DM'd him and I was like, hey, can I take your content and can I put it on TikTok? And he agreed, and he became one of our first clients. And so for 2 weeks, I literally went through every one of his videos, and I cut clips and put it on TikTok. Now you can do it with AI in a much easier way. But I was sitting and doing it manually, and we had a video go viral, and he saw the impact of the platform for education, and was like, OK, I'm going to film now. And over the course of about 10 months, we helped him grow his audience to 100,000 followers. This was in 2020. And saw the impact of a platform like TikTok in reaching audiences more effectively, especially around educational content. Around the same time, this nonprofit called Community Change reached out. They were doing a campaign around the child tax credit, and they were trying to figure out how they could get the tax policy in front of more people, because they realized that the only places it was being talked about was in DC amongst policy folks, like most policies, and in the news media behind paywalls. It wasn't reaching the communities that actually needed to get the information. And so we were like, hey, why don't we help you think through how you can get this in front of more people? And so over the course of 2 weeks, we helped them recruit and train about 15 content creators who had nothing in common. These are fashion creators, makeup artists, rappers. And all of these creators had nothing in common other than the fact that they had all gotten the policy or were part of families that got the policy. And so we worked with them and had them do a video literally saying, this is what I used it for, you should use it too. This is May of 2021. Our goal was to reach 100,000 people. We reached almost 400,000 and sent almost 10,000 people to a website with the resources on the tax policy. And at the same time, invested their dollars into people, not Meta, and saw the impact of sort of the child tax credit, but also really the impact of investing in people with lived experiences around an issue. And so we saw that impact. That was sort of our holy shit moment. We pivoted, and since then have helped hundreds of advocacy organizations work with thousands of creators focused on centering the lived experiences of creators. Now, before I get into sort of the mechanics of this work, I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of why the creator economy is what it is and changing news consumption patterns. One of the sort of big changes we've seen over the last 10 years, but also over the last 6, is how algorithms have moved. We used to have algorithms that were based on proximity. So Instagram would feed you content based on your network, based on who you follow in a chronological timeline, like who posted 10 minutes ago. TikTok is a recommendation-based algorithm and sort of caused all the other platforms to move away from sort of everything around you to what the algorithm thinks you will like. And so we've moved away from sort of things in our network to things the algorithm decides you'll like based on signals you might exhibit on the platform, but also really based on like what the algorithm's goals are and what the company's goals are. And this has resulted in sort of a really rapid change in our media ecosystem. I'm sure everyone in this room has seen the Pew stats on consumption, but I'm still going to repeat it because it's really important and sort of contextualizes the work we're doing. 1 in 5 Americans gets their news primarily from social media influencers. 37%, or almost 2 in 5 Gen Zers, gets their news from primarily social media influencers. This number for Gen Z is more than any other format. They get their news from print, cable, traditional, legacy. They get more of their news from social media influencers than anywhere else. And 65% of the people who get their news from social media influencers say that they get a mix of personal information, a mix of facts, and more importantly, that they trust the news more because it is in an interactive format on a platform that they prefer. And so the news that they're consuming from social media influencers is reaching them where they are. And this sort of consumption is happening at a time where only 32% of Americans say they trust traditional media to some level. And this number falls even more for young people, for people of color who've traditionally been left out of a lot of news coverage. And so this sort of changing media consumption is resulting in newsrooms closing and is continuing to sort of exacerbate the gaps we're seeing in the news ecosystem. And is resulting in a lot of creators sort of stepping up to fill these gaps and stepping up to create information around the issues they care about to audiences. A lot of creators are sort of understanding, not only from their audiences, but also from their own consumption patterns about where the gaps are, and starting to sort of fill those gaps by translating public information, by translating complicated policy information in bite-sized content, 30, 60, 90-second clips to their audiences so that they can sort of fill their gap, but also make sure that their audience gets information. They're doing everything from get ready with me's to vlogs, to skits, to direct-to-cameras, reaching people on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and they're filling the gap. We've seen a lot of this work firsthand at Social Current. In sort of 2020, I skipped that slide. In 2024, we worked with about 1,000 creators to create almost 4,000 pieces of content around everything from voter registration and voter deadlines, because if you've tried to vote lately, it is so complicated. There's so many dates, it's not easy, you don't know what to do. And so we've helped influencers work with their audiences to tell them sort of how and where and why to vote. We've also helped sort of break down Supreme Court decisions, because shout out Supreme Court Summer, to audiences in a more sort of rapid, easy way, so that their audiences know what's happening. And sort of last year, 82% of the creators we worked with weren't political or news creators. They were finance creators, parenting creators, gaming creators. These were creators whose everyday formats weren't sharing the news, but they partnered with a nonprofit that was doing research, had access to information, and also they had a lived experience around the policy or the issue they shared and wanted to share that lived experience and story with their audience so that they could reach a larger audience, but also make sure that their audience got the resources they need. I have some examples up on the screen, but the first one is an example of a creator who's a veteran talking about sort of veterans issues pre-election in a format that's sort of like approaching someone on the street. The second one is a creator who brought together a group of other creators to talk about the importance of voting the week before the election, but also talks about how everything is political and why something is political for each of the creators there. That content was shared by celebrities like Lizzo organically. And the final one is a long-form YouTuber who does content on scams, like the healthcare system or pyramid schemes, but did a 20-minute video or 15-minute YouTube video talking about Project 2025 and basically breaking it down to the audience. That video has almost 200,000 views on YouTube. It can be everything from this to what's happening in LA right now, or it can be creators that are sort of filling a gap in states where there might not be a dedicated climate reporter after a natural disaster. Or it can be creators that are sharing information about abortion funds in states where abortion is illegal. And so a lot of creators sort of come stepping up to fill a gap, and it's important that we trust these creators and help them reach audiences more effectively and invest in them and their success. look, I'm not trying to say sort of creators are the silver bullet and investing in creators is going to solve every single challenge we have with trust in news, but I think it is part of the solution. And creators, when invested in alongside journalists, can really amplify and reach audiences more effectively. So before I go into a little more of that conversation, I want to briefly touch on what we've seen a lot when we talk about creators and journalists in the same space. So in August, I was at the DNC. And for the first time ever, they had about 200 creators there. And I'm sure you've all seen sort of a lot of the coverage post-DNC about creators being there. And a lot of it was like, why are creators here? Are they credible? And a lot of the coverage was questioning why creators were in that space. And some of it was valid. Some of it was about the access creators had that journalists didn't have, which is fair. But some of it was questioning their expertise. And these creators, you can't walk on the street without them getting recognized and hearing about how they've impacted someone's life. These creators are reaching tens of millions of people every day. But more importantly, they have lived experiences around an issue that a government is going to impact, and they have every right to understand how an administration will impact them, how an administration is impacting them, as we're seeing around the country right now. These creators have a responsibility to their audience to break down political processes and make sure that more people have access to how politics works. And so instead of sort of focusing conversations on why creators, why journalists, we should start thinking about how we can sort of invest in bringing both together. A lot of the creators that are sharing news content aren't making news content by themselves, they're sharing journalist content. They're resharing things that journalists are reporting on, but in accessible ways, because it might be an article and no one wants to read that article, they want to watch a video. So the creator will green screen it and talk about it. Like, a lot of creators are sort of taking what is already being reported on and just adding their own flavor to it. And so we should start thinking about how organizations can invest in partnerships between journalists and creators for the ones that are either creators or journalists. And then there's also a growing class of people that are both creators and journalists. These are journalists by training that are starting to use creator formats, or these are creators who have been journalists by training but are now primarily creators. And so we should start thinking about sort of how we can bring these two sides together. So roughly, what does it look like in like a very tactical way for an organization to work with creators? So folks come to us, they talk about their goals. We help them identify and source creators. We then reach out to them, understand what they care about, why. If we're working on a specific story, we'll share that with them to see if they want to talk about it. We'll then sort of negotiate, contract, think through what deliverables. Are they doing a YouTube video, an Instagram video? What does that look like? They'll then create content. We'll work with them to review it. They'll go live, and we'll repeat. But the core of sort of all of this is really an emphasis on helping people build relationships with creators and helping people think through how they can support and resource creators. Because if you think about a creator, typically, they're doing it all by themselves in their home, on a phone, usually part-time. And so any support you can provide with research, with fact-checking, with editorial support, how to tell a story better, that will help them too. And so we should think about how we can sort of help organizations build relationships with creators. I want to talk about a specific example of a collaboration between a newsroom and a creator. So on the screen, this is a creator. Her name's Victoria Alexander. She does a lot of social justice content online. She also works at a university and has a large sort of 18 to 25-year-old audience. And so we helped her partner with The Markup, who was at that time doing a story on university tracking. And I'm glad this was when I graduated, because I learned so many things about how a university tracks you as a student. But at the core, it was basically if you open up like Blackboard, which is the university submission app, and then you open up another tab, the university's tracking what you do in the other tab, even if it's not related to whatever you're doing with the university. So it's crazy. And they did an article, and they'd already written it, and they were trying to figure out how they could get it in front of a larger audience. And so they went to Victoria, who has a large audience, who is university students, cares about this. And she did a green screen video basically breaking down what was already in the article, crediting the markup and working with the markup to make sure that she got the core points. And the video reached almost 50,000 more people than it had online and had thousands of engagements. And it was sort of continuing what was already reported on, but in a new format. And then the markup also took it and was able to run ads on it. And so it's like this can be one of the ways you can work with creators. If you're an organization thinking about sort of like how you want to engage creators, you can do everything from directly working with creators to contracting creators for your organization to building some sort of creator fellowship where you have creators that are sort of on deck. You can work with creators to provide grants or access to editors, fact checkers, research support. You can work with creators to amplify content. There's so many different ways for you to work with creators, and you don't have to start with like 100. You can start with one creator in your network and supporting them. But you should be thinking about how you can sort of bring creators into your news ecosystem to reach audiences more effectively. We've helped organizations build fellowships around the economy and ways for them to sort of create content on a more recurring basis with an organization that has research polling messaging. We've helped climate organizations build ambassador programs focused around resource support in climate disasters because almost every month we have something coming up and we want to make sure creators are on deck to support in those moments, but also have the resources to connect climate to the villains who are causing a lot of our climate disasters. We have polling organizations and research organizations that are building partnerships with creators. And so it doesn't have to look one specific way. The most important thing for you to think about is how you can start and then how you can build from there and how you can help organizations, newsrooms build relationships with creators. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about some of the more direct work we've done as well. So one of the things we're focused on at Social Current is really building infrastructure to help any organization do this work. Our sort of thesis is that in the next 3 to 4 years, if you don't have a creator network, it's going to be really hard for you to reach audiences more effectively because consumption is moving away from institutions towards people, and creators can be the people you invest in. You don't have to invest in a specific platform. You have to invest in specific people. That way, no matter what platform we are on, they can move their audience amongst sort of those platforms. We've done everything from hosting creator briefings where we'll bring in experts to teach creators about sort of how to write a story better or how to report something better or how to file your taxes because a lot of these creators are one-person businesses. We also have a newsletter where we're sort of helping creators think through these various issues. We also do creator dinners and events focused on bringing creators together to understand the role they play in distributing information. And then we're also building tools, technology, and resources for any organization to build their own creator networks because our long-term goal is for organizations to have their own direct relationships with creators instead of talking to us because that's where we see the real value. It's if you know creators and if you're able to engage with creators. And so if you're interested in talking about any of this or have any questions about the creator space, I'll be around later and happy to chat. If you don't take anything away from this, just take the one thing that you should be investing in creators and you should build relationships with creators. Thank you so much.